Welcome to UO Today. I'm Steve Shankman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest is Dare Baldwin, a professor in the Department of Psychology. Dare Baldwin earned her BA at the University of California, Berkeley, her Master's of Science at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and her PhD in Psychology and Cognitive Science at Stanford. She came to the University of Oregon in 1992. She is the head of the Baldwin Research Lab. She studies the development of social understanding and language development, looking at such questions as how infants process human actions and how language development is affected by the development of social understanding. Dare Baldwin is the author of numerous papers in professional journals. She is the co-editor of the book Intentions and Intentionality, Foundations of Social Cognition. She also has several book and article manuscripts in preparation. Her project for a book entitled Action on Action will be funded by 2 recent awards. Dare Baldwin is the winner of the Cattell Sabbatical Fellowship for this year and a Guggenheim Fellowship for 2007. Welcome. Well, congratulations on both of those. I didn't know about the Cattell. I do know about the Guggenheim, and it's a very prestigious award, and you're bringing great glory to the university.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I hear you an awardee yourself.
Well, now Cattell, tell us about Cattell.
So James McKean Cattell, famous developmental psychologist, and a sabbatical award named in his honor.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels very good to receive this award.
Yeah, excellent. And I understand you began as a pre-med student.
Yes, that's right.
And then you, any regrets?
Oh, yeah, I'm fascinated by medicine, and this is one of my hobbies, is to read health newsletters and things like this. So a little bit of regret. I just wish I could have 2 lives because I really adore being a psychologist as well.
So in medicine, what did you imagine that you, what attracted you to the medical field?
I think that health issues are always the type of thing that was of great interest to me. I recall reading a book by Crick, I believe, about the gossip test. You can always figure out what would be the right career for you based on what you like to gossip about.
I see.
For some reason, talking about diseases and health interventions and things like that is just deeply interesting to me, strange as it may seem.
Well, do you gossip about psychology as well?
Yes.
And how does one gossip about psychology? Just making observations about people's behavior?
Well, yeah, gossip might be a slightly strong word, but I think it's more just being very interested in reading anything that you can find in the media, which is nowadays a lot about psychological phenomena and research findings. It's always just of great interest to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, were your parents surprised when you decided to become a psychologist?
Yeah, I think so.
Really?
A little bit worried. So this was in the era when your child graduated with a psychology degree, and what could they do?
I see. Yeah, but they're feeling.
I think they're okay about it now.
Now tell us about your lab.
Okay, so in the Baldwin Research Lab, we are currently very focused on studying how people process others' action. And by action, I really mean something very everyday. I really mean that on a daily basis, we're watching people engage in thousands of different motions. They're moving about the kitchen, cleaning up, washing the dishes, cooking. They're getting dressed in the morning. They're brushing their teeth. They're driving their kids to school. They're shopping at the grocery store, so on and so forth. And all of these everyday intentional goal-related actions generate motion displays that are actually extremely complex on the surface level. And when we watch people engage in intentional action, they don't necessarily pause as they complete one action before they begin the next. They just move fluidly from one thing to the next. And often we can't see everything they do. We just see snippets, partly because of our own attention is wandering. So we're only picking up little bits and pieces of what's going on. And those are just a couple of examples of the complexity involved, but this complexity seems to leave us completely unfazed. We readily draw inferences about what they're meaning to do and why they're meaning to do it and what implications that has for our own action and for what we should expect about their future actions and what it explains about something we observed about them in the past and so on and so forth. So we just glean information very rapidly and seemingly effortlessly about other people's action. In the Baldwin Research Lab, we'd like to understand how that's done. How is it that this very complex motion display is redescribed in terms of these sophisticated inferences in this whole network of knowledge about people?
If I'm correctly processing what you just said or part of it, body language, reading the body, in a sense, is a prerequisite to understanding actually how language skills communicate.
Yes, exactly. Although I think the term body language, people use very differently. Different people use very differently. Some people mean gestures. Some people mean, subtle unconscious processing of body posture and dilation of eyes or whatever. And so I prefer this term human action because it obviously encompasses all of those things. And the people smarts is the ability to take advantage of all of that.
Tell us why this is an important thing to know about and the kinds of things that this research can discover that are going to be helpful to people in their lives.
Yeah. Why is it important to know about how we process action? Well, if you can't process action, then you can't function as a human being. So obviously humans are a deeply social species, and social behavior, social engagement, especially among human beings, requires very strong facility at making sense of other people's actions. And one very concrete example of that is that being able to interpret other people's actions is quite foundational for language learning. If you're not good at figuring out what things in the world people are meaning to talk about, let's say you don't know the language and it's your job to learn it, and if you're not good at figuring out from their actions what objects they're meaning to talk about, then you're going to have a lot of difficulty figuring out what the words mean in that language. And some research that I did some years ago with an autism expert in England, Simon Baron-Cohen, was looking at exactly that issue. We had found in our own research that even infants are skilled at interpreting what other people are meaning to talk about, what they're intending to refer to. And we brought the same methodology to children with autism and learned that their difficulties with that were directly responsible for them not being able to learn the meanings of new words. So you can see there that the ability to make sense of other people's action is sort of critically foundational for jump-starting language learning. And in someone who has deficits in this action processing realm, you immediately see implications for language learning and presumably for other aspects of knowledge acquisition as well.
So is this more or less accepted now that autism is somehow related to an inability to process actions? That, in other words, the person who's autistic will hear the words but not necessarily process the actions that give the words meaning? So
I think that's a very insightful, focused question. I think your question was, is this well accepted now?
Yes.
And I would say no, it's not well accepted now. It's well accepted that one of the core deficits of autism is a deficit in social understanding. But there are a number of possible stories about the origins of those social understanding deficits. And there are a number of possible causes that could be involved, and perhaps all of these are involved. But at this point, action processing is one cause that might, so difficulties with action processing might then ultimately engender difficulties in social understanding. And there are a few pieces of evidence out there to suggest that that is one causal path to social deficits in autism, but there probably are others, deficits, sources of the deficit as well, and it's probably, like all things, not going to be, a simple single cause kind of outcome. So, at this point, it's not well accepted. It probably will never be well accepted if one wanted to take action processing deficits as the only source.
Mm-hmm. So you must, by doing this research, kind of see the world differently from other people when you're watching me talk, for example, or you're looking at political figures giving speeches or this kind of thing, or even looking at international conflicts and so on.
Yeah.
Do you ever bring this to? I mean, do you have certain insights as to certain conflicts that are related to your research?
You know, interestingly, I think that one's natural, intuitive system for action processing is fairly automatic, and it's almost impossible to turn it off. And so that makes me not different from anyone else. I'm sort of embedded in processing people's action in the normal way because I can't consciously turn it off.
Yeah.
But if I were to, I would have observations about you or myself with this gesturing stuff.
Yeah.
If I were to watch a videotape of myself over and over and over, then somehow I can become released from this compulsion to process the action in the normal way.
Yeah.
And I spend time watching things that people might regard as unusual. For example, in our lab group, we often bring in movies to look at, such as Charlie Chaplin movies, which are really exceptional examples of playing around with intentions and goals and how action communicates about intentions and goals. And so we watch these in our lab group for ideas about new studies for looking at infants' dawning understanding of intentions. So you can only get the Charlie Chaplin jokes if you have an intact action processing system, for example. And we look at animations because animators are amazingly intuitive understanders of how people glean information about goals and intentions from others' actions. So they know how to, for example, take a carpet and animate it so that it looks like a sentient being, like a magic carpet. And, well, one of the things you do is stick eyes on it. Another thing you do is give it certain kinds of motion patterns, and it will look like it's your friend.
Right. And so you're imagining this is the kind of thing, say, babies do when they're kind of conferring upon actions a certain vividness and liveliness that allows them to understand language. I don't know.
Ask me again. Ask me again.
No, I was just thinking you were talking about animation and you're putting eyes on the carpet and that sort of thing. That somehow, what I'm suggesting is then with language, which looks like a very abstract kind of thing, if you're saying that the action is somehow, action is part of, or how one begins to understand language in these infants, I'm just wondering whether the actions somehow are, the infant sees them somehow in it with wings or with eyes or something that kind of makes it animated in a way.
Right.
That, I don't know. Maybe it's not something you've you've thought about.
Interesting ideas, and this I don't think this is along the lines that I've been thinking about it. Really, I've been trying to think more in terms of when infants are entering the world, they just don't have much knowledge about why people are doing what they're doing.
Right.
So you think of an infant sitting in an infant seat in a kitchen, and the dad is running around the kitchen and cleaning things up. Okay, the infant's sitting there watching it, let's say a 2-month-old infant or a 4-month-old who has good visual acuity, and what do they make of all that? They don't know what refrigerators are or why we would need to have cold storage to preserve meats. They don't know why you need to have running water on dishes to clean them to avoid bacterial buildup and mold. You know, sort of the knowledge that's required to actually understand intentional action, once you start thinking about it, is fairly large, and infants presumably don't have much of that. So what sense can they make of this, what seems to us a fairly simple everyday kind of motion display to interpret? And I've been trying to think about, how do they get started at that without having that knowledge? How do they come to acquire that knowledge about making sense of human action? And the idea is that there might be some pattern recognition strategies that babies bring to the processing of motion displays that enable them to pick out the relevant pieces of information within that continuous motion display, and that those sort of packages of information that their pattern recognition devices are sensitive to just happen to be the right ones that help pick out, for example, a grasping action versus a lifting action versus a placing action. So they may be sensitive to structural properties or patterns that pull out just the right segments within this continuous stream so they can get started processing the right packages within that motion stream.
And so if you could let our audience know, what are the implications of this then for language learning and language acquisition?
So as I alluded to earlier, you need to be good at this stuff to be able to make sense of what people are saying, because when you're an infant and the verbiage that you're hearing is uninterpretable, essentially, because much of it is arbitrary, and meaning that the sound patterns coming out of people's mouths don't sort of naturally have any inclination to mean, you know, like a lion could, in any other language, be a completely different sound pattern.
Right.
So somehow the infants have to link the sound patterns they're hearing to relevant things in the world. And a big part of how one approaches that, based on research that we and others have done, seems to be the ability to read other people's actions, to understand from their gestures, their body posture, their gaze direction, their emotional displays, and so on and so forth, what they're meaning to talk about. So if you can't read that stuff about action, or if in the case of autism, it may be that you're simply uninterested. It may not be that you can't read it, but you're just uninterested, so you don't read it. Then you just can't get started at language learning.
So what are, have you worked at all with people who teach languages, not just English, but foreign, what we call foreign languages, a term that strikes me as weird these days. Other languages other than English.
Yeah. So to adults, are you thinking?
Even to adults, or to younger people. Is there anything about your research that has implications for learning languages, even second languages?
Interesting. My guess is that for learning second languages, I haven't actually worked with anyone, so this is like completely
off the cuff.
Random speculation. But my sense is that when you're an adult learning a language other than your native language, that your learning will be enriched if you're in conversational situations where people are giving good action clues to what they mean to talk about, that will facilitate your learning. And that is rarely the case for adults learning a non-native language. Often we're in a decontextualized situation in a classroom, learning from a teacher, in a book about translation associations to get things started off the ground. And my guess is that learning would be enriched if it has this action component to it, which is closer to the immersion learning situation, which we know is highly effective for promoting ultimate fluency, at least in young children. I think there's probably less evidence concerning that with adults, but immersion learning seems to promote rapid learning in adults, that's for sure. So, and one other thing to say there is that some of the research that a former graduate student, Rebecca Brand, and I had done was to look at, in the action domain, there seems to be a special way of behaving if the person that we're addressing is an infant. So if you're a baby and I want to show you how to do this new thing with this cool object, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to exaggerate my motions. I'm going to give big motions like this. See, I can do this, this, see, this, and now that, and this. And if you're the adult that you are, and I'm actually showing you the same cool object, I'm just doing, you can do this, you can do that, and that. Here you go. So action that's oriented towards infants has an exaggerated, highlighted structure that clearly helps them to pick out what are the meaningful units within that motion flow and what was intended in that motion stream. So we've called this kind of action motionese, which is a play on the term motherese, because in the language domain, as anyone knows who listens to parents, we have a special way of talking to infants. We exaggerate our voices, we show more repetition, simpler sentence structure, so on and so forth. And those exaggerations also, there's strong evidence for them aiding infants' acquisition of language. And the idea is that the motionese in the action domain similarly aids their analysis of the motion information, helps to promote their action processing, and it ought to also promote their language learning. So if the action is, understanding the action is important for learning the language, then exaggerations to the motion that help you analyze the action will facilitate the language learning. And so I think, for a learner of a non-native language, if you could go back to childhood and be delivered input that gave you the motionese and the motherese and the immersion, that all of which children receive, we might well see promoted learning.
Yeah, well, you've answered my question very, very well. Maybe people should speak. I mean, in a sense, second language learners are babies. Maybe they should just be, they should be big gestures and go more slowly.
Yeah, the only difficulty is that as adults we tend to feel patronized and condescended to when people speak to us that way.
Right.
And so this is something that elderly individuals often face, that they are talked to as though they're youthful, and it's very irritating. So if we could somehow overcome that.
But actually this is unplanned comment, but one of the reasons I love learning new languages is that it makes me feel like a baby. So I think that's, so if people have big gestures, it's fine. Maybe people don't want to feel like babies. Maybe that's part of the problem.
So it makes you feel like a baby, like an amazing puzzle to be solved, or in what way?
Because the words don't really, they barely mean. They're sounds. They're sounds that are not that directly related to common things, so they have a mystery about them. You're trying to understand them. There's a purity to the sound in and of itself without referring. That makes me feel also like people are taking care of me. I feel, whatever how you feel, if you've had a happy childhood, or if you've been happy as a baby, there's this feeling of things being mysterious and
what
that
what a lovely idea for it, because I think people often really dislike the early learning part of language learning because they have this tremendous feeling of lack of control and everything's so ambiguous.
That's the issue, I think. And apparently men have a more difficult time learning languages for that reason than women, because they like to be in control. So anyway, maybe we're beginning a new field here. So I understand this is an important thing for us to speak about with our audience, that you use undergraduates in your research, or you involve undergraduates in your research as well as graduate students?
On many different levels, actually. So undergraduates are participating in our research as direct research participants, and also, we have many undergraduates who are assisting us with the research as research assistants in the lab, also doing honors theses in the lab, and in some cases we have a McNair scholar currently working in the lab. So on many different levels.
Many levels, many undergraduates, graduate students are involved in this process. And what about your subjects, the young, the babies themselves?
So, they're adorable.
And how do you recruit them, and what's the parents' involvement?
So we have a wonderful resource in the psychology department that Michael Posner and Mary Rothbard initiated, where people who are interested in participating in the research, people in the community, have allowed themselves to be continued on a contact file list, and we have their children's birth dates and their phone numbers, and that's about it. And then we regularly contact them about whether they might be interested in a particular study, and they can always say yes or no. And so we have people coming in from the community all the time. And most of the studies in my lab that they participate in are just a 1 hour kind of a session, and it's a fun play session. So oftentimes, the first time people participate, they're a little bit leery about, will this be a completely clinical sort of situation, but it turns out to be really fun. It's a chance for babies to get one-on-one attention and parents to hear about an interesting research enterprise.
So you have an audience here, so they should get in touch with the Baldwin Center if they want their kids to be involved with this?
Please do. Okay. Love to see you.
And who supports your research? Where do the funds come from?
Well, over the years, I've had support from several different sources, among them the National Science Foundation, a couple of different grants from the NSF, and then I was in Canada for about a 3.5-year period at the University of British Columbia and was supported there by a couple of national level federal programs, SHRC and NSERC, and also the John Merck Scholars Fund has supported the research at one time, and now the Guggenheim and Cattell as well.
Now let's talk a bit in just a few minutes that remain. We can just begin. Your co-edited book, 2001, Intentions and Intentionality. And I just wanted to ask you, what is meant by intention and intentionality? You mentioned it here today. What does that mean in the field?
Well, when we're using the term intentions, we're really using it much as it's used in normal parlance. So we're talking about the commitment that one makes to take an action. And so my particular interest is how is it that we're able to figure out what other people's intentions are, because what we see is their actions, and we have to infer what their underlying intentions or motivations for action are.
I see.
And then intentionality is, essentially the meaning of that term is in contrast to doing something accidentally, right? So intentionality is the capability of doing something with the commitment to act.
And action on action. We only have about 2 minutes, and you've gotten a Guggenheim on this, so your proposal must have been longer than that. But tell us what you mean by action on action.
Well, what I'm trying to do is to write a book about how humans process others' actions, and this is something that, surprisingly enough, there doesn't exist a single book on this direct topic. So that's the sense in which it's action on action.
I see.
And what I'm trying to do in the book is to bring together pieces of work that have been conducted in a variety of fields that all bear on trying to understand what the perceptual and cognitive system we all possess as normal human adults for making sense of other people's action.
And do you imagine this to be a book?
I hope so.
So the action is the action of your writing the book?
Right.
On action.
And all the research action that everyone in all these different fields individually has been taking, and my trying to compile it together into a package of what we currently understand.
Well, we should probably let you go back and take action on these actions. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And we've been speaking with Dare Baldwin, who is a professor in the psychology department at the University of Oregon, and who has recently won a prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship. Thank you for watching.